Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this In the Hot Seat session at the studio. My name is Doug Drinkwater. I'm the Director of Strategy here at Hot Topics, and today we're talking about what kind of technology leader are you? Evangelist, entrepreneur, or engineer, maybe something else entirely. I'm joined today by Supriya Wadwadan, who is the EVP and Global Head of IT Services at DPT-HL, Joe Graham, who is CDIO at GHD Hair, and we have Phil Jordan, who was most recently Group CIO at Sainsbury's, and Andy Caddy, who is Group CIO at Pure Gym. So today we're going to look at how traditional IT leadership has evolved. We're going to explore the different skill sets you need to be a digital and IT leader today, and ultimately how you have to adapt depending on what the business requires and as market demands change as well. So, Supriya, Joe, I'm going to start with you in that order. I'm going to ask you what your leadership style is and how it's evolved over the course of your career. So, Supriya, let me come to you first.
Yeah, thanks very much, and good to be here, even if virtually from Singapore. I think I have to really reflect back to when I started my career. I guess it's where we all started. As I started as a software engineer, so I have a very strong tech background. I guess there's still an engineer in me if I look hard enough. But over the years, I think it's about the business, learning about the business, keeping pace with technology, and then, of course, all the other soft skills you need to have an idea, to sell it, to build your and grow your company. I think there's a lot of other skills. So I guess that kind of makes me at this point a Jill of all trades.
Fantastic. Joe, how do you see your skill set and how has it evolved over time?
So I didn't start as a software engineer. I was more in the business analysis space and project delivery, and subsequently went into more of a service role before going into more senior IT directorships. And I think my probable grounding in that business analysis and being really close to the business has definitely evolved me, I think, more into that entrepreneur. I think the engineering piece is in all of us in that problem solving space. So when something goes wrong, how do you approach it? How do you systematically diagnose things? But I would say more latterly, I'm definitely in that enabling entrepreneur, probably symptomatic of the fact that I've worked for quite opportunistic businesses. So technology has definitely had to be responsive and part of that. How do we make this work?
Fantastic. Let me come to the gents on stage then. Phil, we've had conversations about this in the past, different skill sets, evolution really of what's required by the business. How have you seen that change over the course of your career?
Well, I think it's changed a lot. I mean, I think the way boardrooms look at a technology lead now is fundamentally different. I actually think the three things are on a continuum, actually. I think engineer, I think an evangelist, an entrepreneur. I think as a CIO or as a technology leader, I think you probably end up growing into those roles as you go, and the board and the business will ask you, I think, to do certain things differently. But I definitely think it's changed a huge amount. I think when I started, it was very much about operating the business, probably. And more increasingly now, it's about transforming and changing the business. And I think that's the evangelism part of the role. I think our job, technology's leadership job, is to bring the power of technology and bring it to life for a business. So I think I think we're all evangelists.
Andy, how's that chime with your experiences? Because I think obviously you've had a number of different CIO and CTO roles. Pure Gym's on a bit of an international expansion, which I guess pushes you into that potentially entrepreneurial side. But how do you see it?
I think it's come such a long way. I think I'm a child of the 80s and 90s in terms of my career, and back then IT was a necessary evil. If you wanted to operate a business at scale, you had to have an IT function doing clever stuff. And therefore you had to have a bunch of people who you probably didn't really want in your business, but they had to be there to operate stuff, right? And I think when I think of my time in retail and banking, IT was this really difficult guardian of expensive, really hard to understand, difficult contracts that were just needed. and that's really what they were. They weren't unlockers of value the way that they are today. I think we've been through over the last 10 or 15 years a real sea change in that, and people seeing the value that somebody who really understands what you can do with technology. And that's really what we can do. And now, I'm sort of with Phil, and there's a continuum here. In a post-COVID world, you're looking to people to say, what can they do, and how can you affect business change with technology? I think that's the real difference. I wish I was 20 years younger, because today we don't have to worry about data centers and networks the way we used to. We don't have to build boxes and connect wires. What you do is you get a capability, and you learn how to use it and change your business appropriately. So for me, I think you have to be all those three. My old boss used to call me a digital anthropologist, and I think I'll stick with that, which is, understanding how you affect people with technology is really what we are.
Yeah, fantastic. One thing I should say is, as this is in the hot seat session, if you have any questions and you're with us in person today, please do put your hand up, and a roving mic will find its way to you before you know it. If you are virtual, then please put your question in, hop in, and we'll try and get to those questions as soon as we can. Don't let me hog the mic, because we could be here for some time. Joe, I want to come to you on the issue of company size, and Phil just mentioned there about this leadership being a continuum. You need to be perhaps an engineer, an entrepreneur, evangelist at different points, but does it differ by the organisational structure, and I guess key to that, the organisational size as well?
Yeah, I think definitely. I also think it's to do with the maturity of the business, and where IT might have historically sat. So if you've historically been sat in finance, you're more likely to be seen as a cost center and not necessarily have the same voice that you might have if you were direct into the CEO. I think similarly, I've seen COOs or even marketing. I think as businesses become more mature, I think there's an absolute recognition that you need the person, and I'm loath to say CIO these days, because we're CDIOs, we're CTOs, we're CTDOs, we're all sorts. But whoever has the responsibility for technology, I think there's a recognition that they need to be at the board table. And I think that comes with the size of the business and them wanting to mature, rather than, because even in some enormous businesses, they don't necessarily have the technology leader at the table. So I think it's more around that recognition of maturity and technology being seen as a platform for growth and enablement.
So Priya, how does that tally with your experience? It's a pretty big organisation, but as I say, as Joe says, it can differ by technology maturity and appetite, I guess, to have tech at the top table.
Absolutely. I think I've kind of started with a country role, in a country supporting a business, and then regional roles, and then we had acquisitions, so we grew through that. Then we scaled up, and now, if I look at our business, we are in 220 countries and territories globally, 600,000 people worldwide. And if you look at that scale, two effects, right? One is technology has helped the business scale. So now I don't think there is a table if tech is not on it, and everything is enabled by tech. That's a very big difference. So if to pick up on what Joe said, if I look at the CIO, the acronym and what it stood for, it was Chief Infrastructure Officer. That's its origin. Then, of course, we know Chief Information Officer, and somewhere along the way, it was Chief Innovation Officer. But increasingly, I see it as Chief Interaction Officer, because we are all digital in how we engage with our customers, our employees, and all the touch points that we have. And also, thanks to things like generative AI, we're also change impact or change influence officers, if you like, bringing all this technology there on the business. So a huge, sea change in where tech was, from back office to, I would say, everywhere.
Brilliant. Thanks for those opening comments all. Sea change, heard that word a few times already, Andy. In terms of, I guess, as you evolve, you're going to need to evolve your own skill sets, and you and I had a conversation about this a couple of months ago. What's the secret there? Is it kind of MBAs? Is it doing a non-exec direct position? Is it volunteering? How do you personally, kind of, over your 30-year career, how are you evolving to make sure you're still relevant?
I think you've always got to take an interest in your own development. It's a really easy thing to forget about, to think that your job is to be the leader, the all-knowing, the person who has all the answers. But actually, my personal philosophy was always to be on a journey of continual learning, and that self-awareness to think, where are my gaps and what can I fill in? And as you evolve in your career, there are always gaps. You can't know everything. You move into new roles, there's bits you don't know. You move into more business-facing roles, there's bits of a business you don't understand. So I think number one is self-awareness. I think then trying to look for different ways of filling those gaps. So when I was a software engineer or when I worked in operations, you'd go on courses and stuff like that. As your career evolves, that's not the way you do stuff anymore. But looking for ways to still fill that gap, whether it's through mentoring, reverse mentoring. So we've done a lot of work with trying to understand what it's like in other areas, and having younger people in their career come in and talk freely about what's going on and how the world changes. Because hey, I'm not a young man anymore. I know it doesn't look like it, but I'm not. And therefore, how can you really stay relevant in those situations? And then I think the other one is always trying to look outside of your own space, because events like this and working your own network really hard, I've always worked very hard to make sure that I'm well connected with a good set of people you can lean on. I think that's a great resource to look at.
Yeah. Phil, what's your experiences?
I was just thinking about it. I mean, I think it's linked to the evangelism. I think it depends again what you're evangelizing, but my sense is, first of all, you've got to know the business as well as anybody else around the board table, because if you don't, I think, I can't imagine a boardroom that doesn't have technology in it these days. If that's true of the business you're in, I would suggest you leave and go and find a business where technology is valued. So first of all, you've got to really punch your weight in terms of business leadership, which means you've got to understand the business as well as any. I think we're very privileged technology leaders because we tend to interact with all parts of the business. So I think in most businesses I've ever worked with, actually the technology leader has probably got the broadest view. And I just think since, particularly post-pandemic, I think that broader view is becoming so important in driving change, which is fantastic for us as an industry, I think. But then I think it's linked to evangelism. I think, I think look where the business wants you to story tell and bring technology to life. And right now that would be sort of product management, product centricity, it would be AI, and how's the business going to evolve from a decision re-engineering perspective. I'd be saying to people, make sure you're out ahead of the business in those areas so that you can, lead the narrative, lead the discussion with the rest of the business. Operational stuff's table stakes, no CIO gets to, and by the way, I think Joe's right, CIO is quite a reductive term these days, we should call it something else. No technology leader can have a conversation that's proactive if things are falling down behind you. But once you've got that sort of nailed from a hygiene perspective, I would be on the front foot with what's going to lead the business in terms of thinking.
Storytelling's interesting. That's a
yeah.
really interesting thing, isn't it? The ability to be able to convey stuff in a way that's compelling.
Chief storyteller, I think.
That's a good one. I like chief
yeah.
storyteller.
I mean, I guess as you develop as well, that goes to show the importance of leveling up your team as well, right? Or having a strong number two, having a team that's alongside you, rather than big gaps between you as a kind of evangelist and a team that could be seen as lagging behind. How do you bring them with you? Because I guess you want to develop yourself, but you need to plug those gaps as well.
Yeah, I mean, actually, Richard's here. We used to work together in Sainsbury's. I think, you have to, first of all, as a leader, you know what you're not good at, so you build a team to compensate for the things you're not very good at as well. But you have to have a set of leaders who can all play that role. And because most organizations are, your leadership group are facing into different parts of the business. Every one of them has to be a storyteller and a leader and be able to lead that narrative. So yeah, I don't think you can have any gap between you and your direct reports. You want everybody to play that role, I think.
Yeah. Joe, what are your experiences on that kind of leveling up your team perspective? You're trying to develop professionally, but you're also trying to bring your team with you. I know that's something that you were very hot on at Boohoo at your last organisation.
I suppose I've been quite lucky that if you go into an organisation that's growing, you end up being able to pretty much build a team from scratch. So you don't tend to inherit a lot of people, and it's a real luxury to be able to really organise your team around people's core strengths and, as Phil said, absolutely plug in the gaps that you've got. And you can also drive a culture. So you can really work on bringing people in who are all about that, evangelizing, advocates, enablers, and really strong on computer says yes rather than no. Doug, you and I've spoken about this many times. You're only as good as your team, and you've kind of got one job, and that's to be an umbrella across the top of them so they can get on and work their magic.
I'll come to you, Phil and Andy, on this next one, which is, you've spoken about that continuum, but I guess, Phil, starting with you, do you think different kinds of leaders are required at different times? I ask that question now, obviously, at the moment, given the economic downturn, that may put additional pressure on cost savings, on resources. Do you think you have to adapt? Obviously, you have to adapt to the circumstance, but do you think certain leaders prosper well in certain situations and less so?
Yeah, maybe. I actually think, in most big businesses, you end up going through that cycle of different roles. It can be in the same day, right? You come off the back of a poor trading weekend in a retailer, everybody's focused on next week and the cost lines of the business, and then there'll be a context shift and somebody wants to do business development. So I think let's not kid ourselves. I think if you're in a fast moving business, as we all are, I was, then you go through that cycle of roles, very, very quickly. And I think one of the things about successful technology leaders is they are able to sort of context shift, talk about the future, talk about cost, talk about the people agenda, think about skill, think about sustainability. So I'm not sure. Yes, I'm sure there's times in a business where some of those things are more relevant than others. But I actually think part of the challenge of leading a big technology division is you have to do all of those things really well. And I suspect all of us over time like some aspects of the job more than others. And again, part of where you build a team is you build a team that somebody will take on the things that you don't enjoy as much, and it leaves you freer to do the things you enjoy. And I think that's one of the benefits of, as you become more into C-suite roles, you get more opportunity to do that. So I'm not sure about, yes, I'm sure a business cycle will demand it, but actually I think most businesses I've worked in, you can run through all those roles in a day.
Yeah. Andy, what's your thought?
I'm with Phil on that one. I think we've all worked in situations where you need people with specific skills. Just a project that's going wrong and you bring in a heavy hitter program director, a service organisation where you need a service director who really gets it and can fix put the fires out. But the problem with one-trick ponies is, they are one-trick ponies and they've got a limited shelf life. So there's definitely, I know on my network, people who can come in and do a job, but you'd use them for that. And I think if that was what I was being used for as a leader, I'd worry about that because the point is you've got to be adaptable and change and be there for a length of time because that's what they're making the investment in bringing you in. So I think you've got to have all the skills in some degree in your pocket. Some are stronger than others, and you've just got to know where to play for your strengths.
Sapriya, I want to come to you at this point. We're speaking about that development as a leader. One anecdote I'll share was with a CIO I spoke to recently who found that as he became more senior, he was moving away obviously from his love of coding, of technical, and that was almost like a loss, a bereavement in a way. He did find obviously over time you get new sources of intellectual stimulation. So how close should you be to the things you're really good at and you really enjoy, whilst taking obviously new tasks on, new roles, new responsibilities?
That question strikes home because, as I mentioned, I started very much as a tech person, in the software engineering space, and an expert in some areas. And I think over time, it's not the expertise that got me here. It's actually I think the others have alluded to it, but it's about being able to source the expertise, whatever expertise is needed. So it's increasingly about the network that you build, the ability to then bring in the people or train them up, as the case may be. But, very specifically for me, during the pandemic, I took this role and I was the remote leader of 5,000 people. And I suddenly discovered a new love and a passion actually for developing people, for connecting, for really making the talent aspect shine more than it was about, solving a business problem. I do all of that, and I think just as the others said, you go through all of that, but you discover new passions along the way. And I think that is the advantage of being in this kind of a role. There's always new developments, there's new things to learn, and if you don't learn, you can become very swiftly obsolete. It's a challenge, but it's also the most exciting part of the job.
Actually, Joe, Supriya raises an interesting question there in terms of different working environments. What we've seen that last 3 years with the introduction of obviously remote working and hybrid working. Has that changed the way that you're having to manage your teams, that you're having to kind of keep them motivated, keep them on side, spot any issues?
Yeah, definitely. I think, we're 3 days hybrid in the office, and there's a real excitement when people are in the office. And I try and keep my diary lighter on the days that I'm in, because I know that, people will want that, chat around the coffee machine, or, I like that whole, have you got a minute? Because and invariably you haven't, but because you've almost organized yourself so that you have, they're the spontaneous discussions that you can really get a lot out of. And people just like to check in. It's human nature, and invariably you're saying to your team, you are literally just checking in with me because you do know the answer to that, and you know what you're suggesting is absolutely spot on. So I think, you've really got to use your days when you're connecting to be connected, because I think when you're not all together, it can just be a relentless series of transactional Teams interactions, which are not the same. They're not the same thing as saying to somebody, oh, I was just about to walk out and get a coffee, let's walk and talk. Because, that's those kind of conversations are where people really feel like you're connected to them and you're interested, and you can build some real affinity.
That's quite interesting with the office and how it's changed. I've seen a couple of people put out of offices when they're actually in the office. I've always assumed that to mean at the pub, but there we go. Phil, one thing we've spoken about, this is perhaps looking at the future direction of CIOs, or any variation, is CIOs could, in your mind, I believe, become CEOs. I think you said that the CIO could become the person that demystifies moving forwards. How realistic is that? And if you're on that journey, what should you be looking at in terms of your own self?
Yeah, I definitely think that. I as you know, I've retired, so I do a plural work now, chair and non-exec. So that's a career opportunity for all technology leaders, because I think every business is looking to put on its board people who've got the skill sets we have, and so that's great for us as a community. But I said earlier, I genuinely have thought this for a long time, that technology leaders see the business more broadly than anybody else, probably have a better handle on the change opportunity and the change dynamics than anybody else. I think if you can add to that the evangelism around product centricity, digital, data, science, and decision re-engineering, there's nobody better placed, I think, to lay out a vision and agenda for a business. And of course, you have to be credible commercially and all the other things that a CEO needs to be. But I really think the skill set that technology leaders possess is ripe for CEO going forward. I think we're going to see loads more technology leaders come through and run businesses, and good, because technology not only operates, but it differentiates and it enables businesses. And I think the pandemic's proven that, hasn't it? I mean, look at how much innovation and investments going back into technology, even though we're in a really difficult macroeconomic climate. It's because smart businesses have worked out the core differentiator through the pandemic was technology. So I do think, and I'm really looking forward to seeing people come through.
Mm-hmm. I guess, Andy, with PureGym, I mean, that's an example, right, of how technology is being used to really grow and scale a business. I mean, how would you react really to those comments about CIOs as future CEOs?
I mean, I'd offer a counterpoint. I'd sort of agree with Phil, but I'd offer a counterpoint, which is if we're not careful, we don't use the opportunity well, then we're living in an age where actually many areas can consume areas that have traditionally been technology. So, MarTech, whether it's MarTech or business intelligence, whether it's security, these different areas I've seen set up in different companies where they're starting to migrate into the business. And that's, there are different models and different, I'm not saying one's better than the other, but if anything, it means the CIO has to work harder, because that uniqueness I talked about earlier of saying, I'm the only one who understands this stuff, so you need me. That's gone. Those days are gone. You have to demonstrate your value, as Phil said, as a storyteller, as someone who sees across the business, who really makes the most of those opportunities and really thinks in those terms, because we do uniquely see how the business functions and how we play a part in it. So I think that's something we've got to build on.
But do you think those things aren't moving into the business? The lines the lines are blurring to the extent that you can't define the boundaries of technology.
I think it's harder. So I think if you look at if I was a CMO looking after all of my MarTech, I'd be saying to the CIO, keep your hands off. This is my world, right? I think that wasn't the case 15 years ago. You'd have to run their stuff for them. And that's just in one domain. I think so if you're not really providing value, they'll say, I think I'll do it myself, thanks, because I don't need what we used to have. That's a challenge that we've got to rise to.
In a way, that's the risk, isn't it? I guess as IT or technology transcends the whole business, IT has to prove its value. It still has a role to play, getting its arms around the whole of the tech ecosystem within the business, right?
Yeah.
Final couple of questions. Priya, I'll come to you on, I guess, how tech savvy each CIO needs to be. I guess, we're speaking about increasingly business leaders first, technology leaders second. How much should you know, and how much should you kind of almost leave to your team?
Yeah, I think that depends is the answer, I think, and it should be, because there are certain cases. I think the team will always be, especially now at the rate at which technology is evolving, my team will always be an expert, a set of experts, and they're likely to know much more of the depth of the topic, and that's how it should be. And I think that's where, with experience comes this knowledge of which technology trends are really relevant to the business, which ones would make sense to adopt, how best to position it. So you at once playing the engineer role of evaluating, the evangelist role of selling it, and then the entrepreneur role of helping the business grow with it. So I think you as the leader have to be that bridge, that connector that brings the expertise to bear on your business and helps to do that for your team. So, these days I haven't written a line of code in years. I'm waiting for the, GitHub Copilot to see if I can brush off my skills, since it's supposed to be so much easier. But seriously, I shouldn't have to. That's not what is my value to the company. And I think, every leader should be really confident in the fact that the team's going to be way more knowledgeable on one or the other technology topic. It's the way it should be. We had reverse mentoring, so you learn from your team as much as you teach them. So I think it's a good blend of the top-down experience and the deep technical knowledge that the teams bring to you.
What about yourself, Joe? What are your thoughts on that? How much you need to be tech savvy as a tech leader?
So I would echo that. I think there's also a role to play around how tech savvy you help the board be. So certainly, I've spent quite a bit of time with my CEO, supporting him with understanding cyber and all things cyber. Not to the degree that he could now go and be a CISO or work in SecOps, but enough for him to be responsible and really understand this, and not to be worried, but to really understand what it means for him as a CEO running a business that, like most people, are exposed if they don't take it seriously. So there's things like that, and then again in the .com space and understanding some of the where we're going in e-com platforms. So there are certain topics that I think it's really important we share, we make everybody tech savvy on, but there's others when it comes to operational IT or other things that they're just not going to necessarily be something that adds value to those conversations. But I think we should definitely take the ones that help make everybody a bit more tech savvy.
Fantastic, thanks, Joe. My last question from me, and if we get some time at the end, I'll do another check if there's any questions in the audience today. Phil, what advice would you have for those in the audience today in terms of how they audit their skill set, look at where they should be going moving forwards?
Well, just on the previous question, I think is the chronic failure if I'm the most technical person in the room. Absolutely, something's gone horribly wrong, in my view. I'm not sure I'm in a position to give advice. I mean, I've always said the same when people have asked me, which is, I say you have to know enough to be credible. And that's true about the business. I think you have to be credible, and that means you have to be able to rub shoulders with everybody in the business and have a point of view, and put your opinion across, and have a point of view about business strategy and the model and the vision for the business. And I think in technology terms, I think you just have to be credible. If you're going to storytell, you have to be credible. And that's why I keep pointing at, where will businesses look next for technology leadership? I think it will be in and around product management, product centricity, and decision re-engineering. So looking at all the decisions in the business and where can you apply a different type of data science technology to change the way we make that decision. That's what businesses are going to change. So I'd be saying to people who want to be CIOs, be a storyteller, be credible, be an evangelist in those areas. So be credible enough from the business perspective, and then be credible enough from a technology perspective. And then just obviously, it's tough being a technology leader. You're quite often saying no, never apologize because nobody else does. It's tough, and you're under a lot of pressure. If you work in a transactional business, a retailer, there's a lot of pressure at Christmas and at Easter and at peak. So, I think it's having good relationships with the people around you who allow you to for the organisation and for you to make mistakes, and you can get back on the front foot quickly. So, credible enough from a business perspective, credible enough from a technology perspective, great relationships. That would be my guidance.
Yeah, it's almost authenticity comes into that as well in terms of be honest about your capabilities.
Yeah, the worst thing you can do, when you're under the pump and things are going badly is do anything that isn't utterly transparent, utterly authentic, right? So, but I suspect most big technology leaders who have a big operational responsibility get there really quickly because you just don't survive if you're not.
Yeah. Andy, what about your advice today?
Best advice I ever got given was by a CFO when I first got an exec position, and I said to him, what would your advice be? And he said, when things are good, always say they're good. When they're bad, make sure you say they're bad. But when things are really bad, never say it's good. I think there's a lot about being the honest voice around the table and how to communicate. I think there's something about we are expected to be across, and relationship build on Phil's point, we have to lean very heavily on being able to converse and communicate and storytell with a very wide range of people. And that's knowing how to convey stuff to a CFO, and then convey it to a CMO, and then talk about it to culture, to a people director. So our ability to be great communicators is right up there. I think the bit I was saying this to someone the other day, the thing, if I had to sort of crunch it down to what is it? We're change managers, we're change agents. So really understanding what that means in change management terms, how you understand what you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it. The most common thing I say to people is, what's the problem we're trying to solve here? Because people come to you with solutions continually. That's whether they bought something, want to buy something, have an idea, they come with solutions. So think about how do you affect change in a really beneficial way, and how do you communicate that to everyone and get everyone on board? Because life's so much easier. We can all change systems, right? It's changing people that's the difficult thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, interestingly, I think every CIO I've spoken to who feel similar to yourself, that have come to retirement, they say the hardest part was the hearts and minds of people and changing that, rather than the tech or process. But Joe, how does that? What's your advice you'd have today for the audience? What do you leave them with in terms of where to focus, how to continually develop themselves?
So I think it's definitely something around that, be credible. And to be credible, you have to really understand the business, put the time in, to both the relationships and understanding the business. So 100% there. But I think you can only be credible if you've built a team that's credible. So for me, it's all about getting your team right. So, making sure you've got the right fit, making sure you've got people who've got each other's backs, that bounce off each other, that as a collective, they're way more powerful than as individuals. So really investing in that team would be my advice. And if there's somebody that you think you've got a performance issue with, or you're not 100% sure about, don't walk past it. it will bite you in the bum if you don't deal with it, and suddenly you won't be credible in one area of your team.
And last but by no means least, Supriya, what's the advice you'd give today?
I would say try everything once. No, but seriously, I think, tech leaders, if you're not careful, you just be a tech guru, which might be what you want to be. But if you want to, be a leader, then you've got to step out of your comfort zone, get out there, work in a secondment in a part of the business, try something new. If something scares you, definitely try it. That would be my advice, because that's how you learn. And as you build the learning around successes and failures, that's what makes you a leader, really.
Fantastic. Well, thanks all for your time today. We do have a couple of minutes for questions. If anyone has any questions today, if not, you can, there's one in the middle. If we can get a mic to the gentleman in the middle there.
Thanks very much. That was extremely interesting and a really good discussion. Do you know, one thing that kept coming up was technology. And actually, I wonder if we're missing a trick. That actually, the word is Chief Information Officer. And as you start looking at the future, I've just been to a presentation by Microsoft on AI and data and so on. The future is around AI, it's around data. And we are, after all, Chief Information Officers. So just as the Chief Financial Officer is responsible for the governance of finance in the organization, so shouldn't we be responsible for the governance of information and data and the quality and the governance of data?
Yeah, from my perspective, I think we are. I mean, why I think information is even a bit reductive is, a while ago I tried to get, when I was at Telefonica, I tried to create this idea that even IT was quite a reductive phrase. The T gets commoditized more and more over time. And actually there are three key I's that we really care about. One is information, for sure, for all the reasons you said. The other one's integration. These are all ecosystems. We're all working with partners. So my personal belief was the better and the faster you are to integrate with is a real competitive advantage. And the third one was innovation. So I was trying to get everybody to say, let's not call it IT, let's call it I3. Really expanding the I focus. But I think you're right. I just don't think CIO is particularly, I think it's a little bit reductive for what we do. But the central part of your question, which is it's about being the custodians of data, I do agree, I think, in terms of governance of it, the cleanliness of it, the management of it, and the use of it, and the exploitation of it.
Because I'm an interim CIO.
You're an I-CIO.
The one thing that's never really, I'm a troubleshooter really. The one thing that's never really the problem most of the time is the technology. The issues are around people, around organization, et cetera, et cetera. And as I think Andy said, we're change agents actually.
Any further comments on that? Joe, you were nodding your head. Any comments on that?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think if you don't understand your data, commoditize it, leverage it, and really understand what it's telling you that you didn't even know to ask it. So that insights piece is massive. So yeah, I don't disagree. I do agree that CIO is limiting because we are so many other things, and I don't know it'll be interesting to see whether we land on an industry norm at some point, or whether we're all just going to carry on being a bit eclectic across different organizations. But I don't for 1 minute think information has left our remit.
Interestingly, the last couple of years we've seen quite a few CIOs that have rebranded the IT departments to try and change some of those perceptions. But Phil, I wouldn't go with the i3 because I think that's actually a car. So don't go with that.
It wasn't when I thought of it. I think there's a question in the back, Doug.
Thanks everyone. It's been a really good session. Really appreciate your time. We've spoken a lot about our teams today and about building our teams and getting the right fit. So we've all been through a lot of turmoil over the past few years. We've had the pandemic and the recent economic impact. I'd be really interested to hear about your tips for maintaining and building high-performing teams when we're going through that level of turmoil, when we're making cuts, and how we keep our teams on side with us?
I mean, for me, the important thing there is communication and staying in touch. I think it's really easy in a world pre-pandemic where you would wander around an environment and get a feel for it, and use your spider senses to pick up how things were. You could do something about it. I think in today's world where it's fully remote, I worry deeply about especially the younger members of my team who are at home, having to face into issues and problems, and then they're unseen. So I think you've got to try and give a voice as much as possible to that. I think you have to, as leaders, generally, we have to spend a lot of time thinking about how do you engage, and whether that is, for me, we do away days, we do monthly get-togethers, we continually survey in a non-intrusive way, but I continually survey on a monthly basis, so we call it the pulse survey, so that we can just understand how people are feeling, and we're really honest with them. Just tell us if things are shit. Tell us, and I make sure that every verbatim comment that comes back, my IT function is about 120 people, it's not huge, but every comment that comes back is read by me and my senior team to make sure we've considered everything, and really understand it. So I think, I'm not saying that those are all winners, but I think you have to work hard, and harder than we've ever had to kind of stay in touch with your teams. Okay, listen, we'll leave it there. Phil, Andy, thanks for joining me in person. Thanks. And Joe, Sapir, thanks for joining us virtually. So everyone, please put your hands together today for the panel.